Watch it. Just barely climb. Stalling. We're falling.
We're going down, Larry!
This happened on January 13, 1982. In the United States, in Washington that year, there was an intense storm, and the whole city was covered in snow. Even with so much snowfall, Washington National Airport was still operational, and flights were taking off one after another from there. In a similar local flight, a plane with 74 passengers and 5 crew members was boarding at this airport in the afternoon. Air Florida Airlines Flight 90 was supposed to stop at Tampa International Airport after taking off from Washington National Airport, and then reach Fort Lauderdale, Hollywood International Airport in Florida. A Boeing 737-222 model airplane from Boeing was being used for this flight, which was a popular passenger aircraft at that time. This plane was manufactured in 1969, and before being purchased by Air Florida in 1980, it was used by United Airlines for 11 years. Before joining this flight, the plane had already flown for 27,000 hours. However, no issues were noticed inside it. Talking about the cockpit, the command of this flight was in the hands of 34-year-old Larry M. Wheaton, who had 8,300 hours of flight time experience. Although Air Florida hired Larry as the first officer in 1978, within 2 years, he was promoted to the position of captain. Apart from Larry, the responsibility of the first officer in this flight was on the shoulders of 31-year-old Roger A., who had 3,353 hours of flying experience. Before joining Air Florida, he had also worked in the U.S. Air Force. As per the schedule, Flight 90's departure time was 2:15 p.m. However, in Washington, the heavy snowfall had been occurring since the morning, causing both pilots to arrive at the airport at around 4:30 a.m. And at that time, Washington National Airport had only one runway. The airport staff had to close the entire airport at intervals to clear the snow. So, during that time, neither could any flight take off nor could any plane land at this airport. To the extent on that day, the airport was closed for snow clearance from 1:15 p.m. to 2:50 p.m. So, this flight was already 35 minutes late. The pilot had an idea beforehand that the flight would be delayed due to the snow. However, they didn't have an estimate of how many minutes or hours the delay would be. Therefore, the captain, based on his estimate, initiated the de-icing process around 2:20 p.m. Now, the notable thing here is that during that period in 1982, there wasn't a lot of technical knowledge available regarding the de-icing process. Details such as which fluid to use for how much snow, in what quantity, etc., were not as well established. At that time, de-icing simply meant removing snow from the plane, and after that, it was up to the pilot to decide whether to take the flight or cancel it. So, in this case, the pilot initiates de-icing, and the process of removing snow from the left wing of the plane begins. However, at that moment, they received news from the ATC that it would take at least another 20 minutes for the runway to be cleared. Moreover, their plane is the 12th in line to take off. Hearing this, Captain Larry immediately halted the de-icing process because there was no benefit in continuing it at that moment. Then, about 20 to 25 minutes later, when they received the news that the runway was clear, at 2:55 p.m., they again initiated the de-icing process for their plane, and this is where a significant issue arose.
Confirm aircraft is...
At that time, a separate team came for de-icing, and somehow they took the temperature measurement incorrectly. At that time, the actual temperature was -4 degrees Celsius, but they mistakenly believed it to be 0 degrees Celsius. Thinking this way, They de-iced the right side wing of the plane by mixing 20 to 30% glycol in warm water, whereas the previous team had used 30 to 40% glycol to de-ice the left wing. So, de-icing for both wings was done using different types of fluids, which is considered quite dangerous. Actually, in today's time, every airline knows that for the sake of aerodynamics, the de-icing of the plane should be uniform. However, in the era of 1982, this information was not known to anyone. Anyway, the de-icing work finished at 3:10 p.m., and Captain Larry asked the de-icing crew in charge if the plane was completely clear. In response, the in charge says, "Yes, the plane is clear. There is just a little snow dust visible on the wings." Now, seeing a bit of snow dust on the wings immediately after de-icing was considered a significant issue. However, the pilots still decided to ignore it, because at that time, it was believed that a little bit of snow would automatically fly off during takeoff. Anyway, after all the formalities, at 3:24 p.m., the process of pushing back the plane began. But here, a new problem arose. Now, here the captain made a mistake by activating the thrust reversers to push the plane back. This doesn't make the plane go backwards, but it leads to another problem. The issue with the Boeing 737-200 aircraft was that if its thrust reversers were used during the pushback process in snowy conditions, the pitch motion of the aircraft would behave strangely. This meant that while the pilot rotated it only a little, the nose of the plane would rapidly rise upwards. This happened because the Boeing 737-200 aircraft had bucket-type reversers, and when they were used, the snow on the ground would be lifted into the air and then freeze back onto the wings. But perhaps the captain was not aware of this problem. Anyway, after running the reversers for a while without any apparent benefit, the captain turned them off. Then, with the help of a large and powerful tug, the plane was pushed back to the runway. By the time the plane reached the runway, it had been approximately 3:35 since the start of the process. The captain made a major mistake amid the chaos due to the flight already being significantly delayed and the presence of several other flights in the queue. During the after-start checklist, when the first officer mentioned anti-ice, the captain responded with OFF. This means that during takeoff, the engine's anti-ice system, which should have been turned on, remained off. Despite saying off during the checklist reading, neither of the pilots paid attention to this aspect. During this time, the captain made another foolish move by bringing his plane quite close to the DC-9 plane standing ahead on the runway. This was done to clear the snow from his plane with the hot air coming from the engines of the DC-9 plane. Now, this foolish step was taken because the hot air from the DC-9's engines not only cleared the snow from their plane, but also blew away the de-icing fluid applied to the plane for de-icing. And because almost an hour had passed since de-icing, the fluid was not as effective by that time. Well, ignoring all these things, the captain prepared for the plane's takeoff. During this time, the first officer realized for the first time that ice might be forming inside the engine because the plane's EPR indicators showed significantly higher readings than normal. At the same time, readings from other instruments like N1 and EGT started fluctuating rapidly. But the captain didn't have much experience flying in snowy conditions. So, thinking that these readings might be fluctuating due to the hot air from the engines of the DC-9 plane in front of them, he decided to ignore them. Anyway, at 3:57, the before takeoff checklist was completed. Just 2 minutes after that, upon receiving clearance, the pilots started takeoff plane onto the runway. There was only one runway at the airport, so many planes were waiting for clearance to land and take off. This meant the pilots felt pressure to quickly take off, possibly leading them to overlook important things and start the takeoff. During this time, the pilots again looked at the EPR and other indicators, noticing their readings fluctuating. Seeing this, the first officer's concern increased once again. The cockpit recorder revealed that upon seeing the fluctuating readings, the first officer expressed concern, saying, "No, I don't feel good about this." However, the captain reassured them, saying that everything was fine. Within a few seconds, the plane crossed 80 knots. During this time, the first officer repeatedly expressed concern, saying that something didn't feel right. However, the captain didn't pay much attention to their remarks. The plane's speed increased, and approximately 45 seconds after starting the takeoff, the plane lifted off. However, as soon as the plane took off, its nose abruptly pitched upward. Upon this happening, both pilots became alarmed and immediately attempted to lower the nose. However, before they could think further, the plane's stick shaker activated, causing the control yoke to vibrate violently. The activation of the stick shaker indicated that the plane was stalling. However, when the pilots checked, the plane's speed seemed normal. In this situation, the pilots couldn't understand the reason for the plane to stall. In reality, at that moment, the aerodynamics of the plane were not functioning properly due to the accumulation of ice on the wings. Additionally, the ice accumulation in the engines was preventing the plane from getting the required thrust. It was a very challenging situation, and neither the captain nor the co-pilot had a clear idea of how to handle it. In the panic, they tried everything to gain control of the plane. However, all their efforts were in vain because, in reality, it was too late to do anything. A few seconds later, the cockpit voice recorder captured the final message of this flight, in which the co-pilot says, "Larry, we're going down, Larry." And Captain Larry could only respond with, "I know." Upon saying this, at 4:01 a.m., barely a minute into takeoff, the plane collided with the 14th Street Bridge and plunged into the Potomac River. Because the plane's nose was pointing upwards, it collided with the bridge, breaking into 3 pieces upon impact with the frozen river. Although the rescue team quickly arrived to assist, only 5 passengers managed to survive this crash. And all remaining 74 people, including both pilots and 3 crew members on the plane, lost their lives. Not only that, but due to the collision with the bridge, there were also 4 fatalities there. That's right. After the investigation, it was found that there were not just one but several different reasons behind this incident, including several mistakes made by the captain, as we have discussed in the video. Later on, it became apparent that if there hadn't been ice accumulation on either the plane's engines or wings, this incident wouldn't have occurred. Moreover, even if there had been ice accumulation on the engines and wings, the plane could have been saved from crashing if the pilots had acted promptly to lower the nose of the aircraft. But all these discussions about what could have happened or what might have been are speculative. The incident, though tragic, has provided us with numerous valuable lessons. How did you like this story? Please comment and let us know. If you liked our video, please encourage us by clicking on the subscribe button to see more such new videos. We are grateful to you for your kind cooperation.